Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Torah View with yours truly, Rabbi Ruvi, coming at you from beautiful, sunny Boca Raton, Florida. I wanted to, this week, share an idea and a story from the late Rabbi Avraham Yehoshua Twerski, who passed away this Sunday at age 90. Rabbi Twerski was a scion of the Chernobyl Hasidic dynasty, and he was a psychiatrist and a world leader in the field of addiction and recovery, and founder of the Gateway Rehab Center in Pittsburgh. On the opening verse of this week's Torah portion, Vayishma Yitro, and Yitro heard. Yitro, Jethro, was Moses' father-in-law. Rashi comments, well, what did he hear? He heard about the splitting of the sea, and he heard about the war waged against the Israelites by the Amalekites shortly after the Exodus and after the splitting of the sea. And it was then that he decided to join the Jewish people. Asks Rabbi Twerski, was the Exodus itself not enough to inspire him to join the Jewish people? The war against the Amalekites, the victory over the Amalekites, certainly pales in scope, scale, and grandeur to the Exodus itself. And so Rabbi Twerski offers the following beautiful insight. By now, Yitro was a firm believer in the God of Israel. What shook him was the fact that the Amalekites had the goal, if you will, the temerity, to attack a people who were so clearly the beneficiaries of divine protection and divine providence. What this said to Yitro was that no matter how clear divine providence may be, there's always room for skepticism and doubt. And the antidote to that, or the way to be able to be anchored in faith, is to have a leader. In other words, the fact that the Amalekites attacked the Jewish people demonstrated that divine providence can sometimes be so striking, and yet one can choose to still remain skeptical and doubtful. And so the only way, the only bulwark against skepticism and doubt is to have a leader. A leader is one who inspires and uplifts and emboldens and empowers and strengthens. And it was at that time that Yitro came to join the Jewish people and to embrace the leadership of Moses. As it says in the Mishnah, Seil Charav, every person must have a leader, a teacher, a source of guidance, and a source of inspiration. In his book, Not Just Stories, a beautiful collection of Hasidic stories and their meaning and their life lessons, Rabbi Twerski talks about the role of a tzaddik, the role of a righteous individual, and in particular, the fact that a tzaddik is petitioned to pray on behalf of others, that we beseech a tzaddik to pray for us and to bless us. Now, we all know that we have a direct line to God without any intermediaries. What is this notion of coming to pray and asking a tzaddik to intervene on our behalf? Of course, there are biblical sources for this. God said to Abraham, I am empowering you to bless others, and that power was passed on to tzaddikim, to righteous individuals of subsequent generations. But what precisely is that power? And so Rabbi Twerski shares a story about the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, who was once traveling in the forest, and it was a very, very cold winter's night, and he came to a shack which was occupied by an elderly, pious Jew. And he invited the Alter Rebbe in. He spent the night there. And as they were talking, the Alter Rebbe learned that this Jew was living there for 50 years in this isolated, remote part of the forest. And he asked him, this is where you live without any attachment to the Jewish community? He says, well, this is where I make a living. And twice a year I go into town to join for services, a minyan for services on Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. And so the Alter Rebbe said, this is a way for a Jew to comport himself, to be in such isolation from the rest of the community. He said, how many people live in that town? The man said 100. So the Alter Rebbe said, God can find a means of income for 100 people. He can surely find for 101. And in the course of the conversation, the Alter Rebbe mentioned that he was just coming from his teacher, the Maggid of Mizrich. By the time the Alter Rebbe woke up the next morning, this man had left the home that he'd lived in for 50 years and moved to the nearest town. So Alter Rebbe was inspired by the man's faith and belief in the words that he had imparted to him, and him invoking that he was a teacher of the Maggid, that inspired this person to realize that there was a better way for him to live, and that God would find a way to provide for him what he needs within a community structure and setting. So the idea of a tzaddik is someone who has a higher perspective and the power to empower us to make decisions that we may not make on our own, or to see things that we may not see on our own. Then when it comes to the idea of prayer and blessings, as Rabbi Twerski explains, it's not as if the tzaddik necessarily changes God's mind as to how a person should be blessed or otherwise necessarily. Very often there are blessings coming our way, but we simply create blockages in our own lives that disturb the flow of energy, the flow of positive energy that was allocated to come our way. Sometimes it's our own behavior that creates blockages, and sometimes we create ruptures in that energy flow. A tzaddik then is like an energy healer that helps us release those blocked pathways, helps us open up spiritually so that the flow that was really destined to come our way is not impeded, or helps us heal in a way that we can create a flow that is destined or determined to come our way, but that we have either blocked or ruptured. As my 8-year-old daughter asked me this past Saturday night about the practice that we have in tearing up the notes that we write to petition the Rebbe for blessing when we place them down on his gravesite at the Ohel, which is done pragmatically for the purposes of privacy so that people cannot see what other people are writing. But she wondered, and she asked me, when we tear those notes and put them down on the Ohel, does the Rebbe then take those notes and put them back together and bring them up to Shemaim and bring them up to heaven? And I thought to myself, what an incredibly beautiful way to describe what a Rebbe does. In those notes, in those letters, are a lot of broken hearts, are a lot of broken souls, are a lot of lives torn asunder. And when we put them down at the Ohel, at the holy place of the Rebbe does in fact take those notes, take those torn pieces of paper, and bring them back together, and bring healing where there is pain, wholeness where there is brokenness. But in order to get to that place, when we petition a tzaddik for blessing, we have to open ourselves up. We have to be completely vulnerable, completely honest, completely open, because that creates the clearing, that creates the space for the tzaddik to be able to do his work in bringing us a greater sense of inner peace, of blessing, and of wholeness. May the memory of Rabbi Twerski be for a blessing. He brought so much healing to this world, and may his memory continue through the lives of all of those that he has touched through his healing and through his teachings, and may we soon see the coming of Mashiach speedily nowadays, and the reunion of all souls together. Thanks for joining us for this week's edition, and please sign up on our YouTube channel, and feel free to share with all of your friends and family.